don't forget about the fundamental human need that we all have to just make sure that we're making an impact in our world and just being really keen to share that with people when you notice it. That comes down to what I call tiny noticeable things, or TNTs, that are a combination of a little bit more human stuff and a little bit more teams stuff that together I think become a really powerful source of motivational fuel for folks.
That's Paula Davis. She's the founder and CEO of the Stress and Resilience Institute, a training and consulting firm that helps organizations reduce burnout and build resilience at the team, leader, and organizational level. She's also the author of Beating Burnout at Work, Why Teams Hold the Secret to Well-Being and Resilience, and Lead Well, 5 Mindsets to Engage, Retain, and Inspire Your Team. So learn 1, why to shift focus from performance to people. 2, how to keep your team connected and motivated. And 3, the tiny noticeable things that improve team dynamics. And if you want to get a quick summary write-up of these takeaways, I recommend you sign up for the free Gold Nugget email newsletter at awesomeatyourjob.com. I'm Pete Bacchitis. This is How to Be Awesome at Your Job. And now, here's Paula. Paula, welcome back.
Hello, it's so good to be back.
Well, I'm excited to hear you talking about leading well and mindsets for engaging, retaining, inspiring folks. Could you kick us off with any of the most surprising discoveries you've made when it comes to what it really takes to engage, retain, and inspire colleagues these days?
One of the things that really surprised me was actually seeing the data around when companies take not only a performance focus, so looking at numbers and metrics and quarterly earnings and all of that, but also layer on sort of a people-focused side. So combining that performance and people focus, the great business outcomes that come from it. So really amplifying the business case was one of the things that I wanted to do in this book, because I think it's a piece of the puzzle that's oftentimes left out when we're talking about some of this human-focused psychology stuff.
What kind of performance boosts are we talking here?
So we are talking about much lower attrition rates, sometimes cut in half. We're talking about higher earnings. We are talking about 4.3 times more likely than the average company to maintain top-tier financial performance for an extended period of time. One of the pieces of the puzzle that I think is really important is that, because I hear from a lot of professional services firms in particular and other companies who say, we're meeting our numbers, we're doing really, really well, we got lots of money rolling into the company. Like, why should we switch? Why is taking a performance focus so wrong? And the answer is it's not wrong. But what the research talks about is that in good times, financially performing companies that perform financially well, the financial performance focused companies do great. But when it comes to downtimes, when it comes to, say, the period of time during the pandemic, what have you, companies that have that balanced approach that really add that people side to the equation tend to go through the rough patches in a more smooth way. They take less bumps.
Okay. Well, could you perhaps paint a picture for what that looks, sounds, feels like in practice in terms of, all right, this is what being in a company that has the hardcore financial performance focus feels like in terms of the vibe and the messaging and the experience and infrastructure, all the stuff, versus what a more balanced place feels like, and maybe share a story for how that plays out in practice.
Sure. Yeah. And so what was interesting is the research that I just talked about found that only 9% of the companies that this was a McKinsey report researched actually fell in that balanced approach. So we're not talking about a lot of companies here. And one of the companies that I think comes to mind for me is one of the companies that I talked about in chapter 3 of the book. It's a really large healthcare organization that has taken its mindset around recognition and appreciation and has really codified it in some unique ways, not only within the organization, but they've actually elevated it, that notion that this is what we're going to do. This is one of the values that we're going to really, really hit hard and kind of walk the talk about. They've elevated it all the way up to the C-suite and board level strategy. So very rarely do I hear a company that either read about or that I've worked with actually say, like some of this well-being, motivational engagement stuff is actually baked into the highest of the highest level strategies that we're thinking about. And so clearly looking at this concept from a dollars and cents standpoint, right? Because it's part of the entire financial strategy that we're looking at for the company, but that it trickles down throughout the organization in a number of different ways. So they have a Making Moments Matter platform where they are able to send these recognitions and appreciations to each other via platform of technology that they have in the organization. They have a yearly event where they actually nominate people at every single level from around the entire system. And they, have different categories of folks who are finalists or what have you. And they pick somebody who, out of the entire organization of 50,000 plus people, most truly espouses these values, and then they honor them at a dinner. And so there's just all these different ways that they have decided to take this one particular piece, this human piece of the puzzle, and actually build it in a number of different ways. And they actually have told me that they see this as their most, from an economic standpoint, valuable retention tool and talent attraction tool. And they can tell that when the people in the organization are truly kind of walking these values, they see better outcomes with their patients in a whole host of ways. So that's the best example I can think of. But
okay, well, could we zoom in into like a Making Moments Matter type thing? Like if I were there in that organization, what would be happening as we do the stuff?
say you had a wonderful interaction or encounter with a colleague, or you noticed somebody who was really walking the values of the organization. You could put a little message into this platform, and that would register, and it would go not only to the person, but it would go to the person's manager. And I think it might even go one level above that as well. They've collected multiple millions of these individual sort of appreciations and recognitions, and just talking about how that has really just helped to build, a really strong cultural fabric.
Oh, I like that so much. It sounds really good. I read the book, The Fund by Rob Copeland, which was talking about Bridgewater and their unique computer stuff and culture. And at least the way he writes it, it sounds like a nightmare, like just a miserable place to be from Rob Copeland's perspective in the book, because it was sort of doing almost the opposite of that in terms of like everybody was continuously tracking and ranking and rating and scoring everybody on all of these competency dimensions. They called it their baseball cards.
Yeah.
And so there's always sort of like this looming threat. Oh, someone could ding me for behaving in such a way, and then others would pile on, and you see your real-time, I guess, status score, baseball card figures plummeting relative to the other people in the organization. It sounded horrendous, as Rob Copeland told it. And this is like the opposite. It's like, here's some cool stuff that went down. Hooray, let's celebrate you publicly.
That does sound horrendous. And I didn't dig into this, but I think you bring up a really good point, or he brings up a really good point, certainly, is that I think when you're talking about making moments matter, or taking time to appreciate someone or highlight something that they've done well, or recognize them, whatever word you want to use, I think that really has to be done authentically. And that's, I think, one of the things you got to watch out for, I think, with any type of platform like this, is it's not about like, ooh, I've got to get to 20 by the end of the week. Really, it's about making them the most authentic that you can. But I think that most of us zoom through work with our head down. Just, we've got so much work to do. We're just trying to get through the day. And so we're at zero. So kind of finding that balance between nothing and a race to get to a certain number.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's funny how these things naturally come up in our brains in terms of, oh, wow, that was a really cool chat I had with Paula. Oh, that was great. They do. They fly right out of our brains as we rush to finish the next thing that needs to be done oh so urgently. So if you have an institutionalized system, process, methodology by which these things are captured, and you just know, oh, I know just the place to park this fun, pleasant thought I had. Here we go.
Because I think a lot of organizations have the recognition policies. So like at 5 years, we're going to send you a something, or at 10 years, we're going to send you a something. They have sort of codified ways to express appreciation and thanks, but they don't necessarily support or talk about or think about or highlight like everyday, day-to-day practices. And so I talk about how important it is to start to kind of go in that direction because it kicks the door open to something much more deep, a fundamental human need for us to know that we matter. So that's whether we are talking about our families, whether we're talking about work, whether we're talking about our communities, we want to know that we're making an impact on some level, right? And so, mattering is about both those moments of appreciation, but it's also about those moments of achievement where I also know that I'm contributing something. I'm contributing something and other people are noticing or affirming or telling me that I am having that level of impact.
That's cool. Okay, so the research is backing this up, and boy, 9%. I guess if we find ourselves,
a lot of room for improvement.
I guess if we find ourselves in an organization that's doing some nice stuff this way, I guess we should feel grateful because it's apparently rare.
It's based on that one research report from McKinsey. Yes. And in fact, I think they found it was 55%, which was the bigger category that, of the quadrants, right? So 4 quadrants, I think it was about 55% who actually didn't show a high level on either category, not outperforming on the performance side and not outperforming on the people side either. So more than half are just kind of, here we go.
Okay. Well, so that's some cool research. And would you say that's the big idea behind Lead Well, or how would you articulate the core thesis?
Well, I think that's definitely a piece of it. I think the big idea behind it is, I think, wanting to let the world of work and particularly leaders know that they're really driving the conversation when it comes to the fact that we're looking at work has changed and how has work changed and why has work changed. Because that's happened, what do we have to, how do leaders have to be thinking differently about that? If we want to continue to have or see good outcomes, if we want to sort of reverse this trend of burnout, if we want to reverse the trend of we're at an all-time low level, at least for the last 11 years of disengagement, things that we keep seeing come up consistently over and over are taking root. And if we're going to go in a different direction with that, how do we do it?
Okay. And we talk about change. What would you say is the most pronounced change difference that the worker, let's say the knowledge worker, is experiencing now as compared to, say, 15 years ago?
So certainly, I mean, we can't avoid the conversation about AI, right? I think that the explosion of just new technology and new ways of thinking about doing work, and really honestly, potentially being at a point where we might see some of those lower level tasks eventually at some point, potentially be consumed by technology and other things, I think is much more realistic than it was 15 years ago. I think certainly the outcomes associated with the pandemic, and I know largely beyond that, or however we want to word that, but I think psychologically, what a lot of people and a lot of leaders don't understand is that we've carried the effects of going through something so traumatic for a lot of people and cataclysmic for a lot of people with us. And we've really, I think, very intentionally started to look very differently at how do I want my life to unfold? How do I want my world of work to look? How do I get both of those two things to integrate? And if I am not seeing a workplace that's going to be supportive of my well-being and supportive of some of the human-centered aspects of work that I feel are much more important now, I may seriously consider going somewhere else. So I don't think we really, 15 years ago was when I stopped my law practice and I started down the path toward this work. We weren't having these conversations at all about well-being in work. And so I think the fact that that's amplified has been a huge change as well.
Okay, now that's intriguing, the COVID pandemic impact. It's so funny. I think back to 2020, I was like another lifetime.
I know.
It's just, and I'd heard that people don't want to make any movies or TV shows set in that time. It's like, we all just want to forget that happened. That's not entertaining in the least to return to such memories. And so then, is there any cool research or data saying, whoa, here's something that feels very different in 2025 as compared to even 2019?
Well, I think one of the pieces that helps explain why people feel so differently now because of that is something called post-traumatic growth. So I think a lot of folks are familiar with the term post-traumatic stress disorder, less people I find are familiar with the term post-traumatic growth. So really understanding that when we go through life's big adversities, when we go through life's big challenges and traumatic experiences, most of us will take a look and go, I do not want that to happen again. I wish this thing hadn't happened because it kind of changed things, completely for me. But what we oftentimes find is that humans do come out the other side at some point, and they share some characteristics. They talk about a renewed sense of connection. They really, really amplify the importance of their relationships. They really want a sense of meaning and some deeper sort of connection involved in their lives. And it's not something that they can just erase or have go away. It's sort of like a permanent shift in how their world has changed. And so I think that that helps to explain why a lot of people have come out of this now really talking about how I would like meaning at work and I would like to have a little bit more, indicator of my impact, or I do want a workplace that's going to support my mental health and well-being. And if I don't get those things, I might stay for a while, but I don't think our workplaces, our leaders really want to have their teams be thinking about how they're going to be plotting their next choice of where they're going to work. We want our workers to feel engaged and motivated and staying. So that has been a big piece for me to think about.
Okay. Well, tell us then, what are some of the top mindsets and practices and cool stories that show them in action, come to life, to give us a picture here?
Yeah. So the first one, and I sort of alluded to this already in the story that we were just talking about, but it's called Prioritizing Sticky Recognition and Mattering. And so this chapter honestly really changed how I have looked at my friendships and my relationships with my family, and certainly my relationship with my 8.5-year-old. Am I telling her enough? Because I think a lot of times we just assume that people know, like, hey, you're in my universe, and so all is good to go. But like really amplifying that sense of showing people their impact and then blooming that fundamental human need to matter, I think is really a cool starting place and really low hanging fruit for a lot of organizations. But then I talk about also the need to amplify what I call ABC needs. So that's a lovely combination of autonomy, belonging, and challenge. So we need a sense of, in our lives, in our world of work, we need a combination of, do I get to choose my own adventure? That's how I think about autonomy. Do I belong? Do I show up to a place where people care about me and my leader has my back and I know I'm part of a group that is doing something well? And do I feel challenged? Am I able to grow and sort of build my skills within my current world of work? And then workload sustainability. So this was one of the hardest chapters for me to tackle, but I felt like this book would be incomplete unless I did, because unmanageable workloads are one of the, if we're looking at the root causes or sources of disengagement and stress and burnout, by far and away has been the number one unmanageable workload that I have seen with all of the groups that I have worked with. And so trying to unpeel all of that, getting into what makes for a more sustainable workload was a big piece of the puzzle. The fourth one is building systemic stress resilience. So to deal with all of the uncertainty and the challenge and the change and the setbacks and the obstacles and the stressors, we have to not just be thinking about resilience at the individual level, but how do our teams become more resilient and how can we fortify organizations to become more resilient? And then lastly, I wanted to talk about values alignment and practices associated with leading in a meaningful way. Certainly with the generational conversation, I think that notion of values alignment and meaning has been pushed to the forefront. And values misalignment is also another one of the core drivers of chronic stress and burnout and disengagement. And so it's that whole kind of puzzle pieces together in terms of the mindsets that I want leaders to be thinking about.
And when you say workload sustainability, I'm curious, what do we know in terms of what makes a workload sustainable or unsustainable?
Yeah. So basically it comes down to really two big buckets. And I decided to write about one of the buckets. And it's really about better processes, procedures, and teaming practices. So if I'm going to get my arms around building more workload sustainability, I got to figure out, like, why do we have so many open projects? Why are we doing so many things that are draining money, and trying to get my arms around just even sort of where all of that is coming from. And then the other piece of the puzzle is recovery. Like, are we making enough time to really stop and pause? And what does that actually mean and look like in our day to day, in our week to week, month to month? It's not just taking a vacation once every 3 years. That doesn't do it. So that notion, though, of really starting with leaders is trying to dig in and just see, like, what do we have? Why do we have so much? Why are we not focusing on certain things? Do we have Band-Aid initiatives going on where, we've got so many open projects, but we don't have the funding or the people or what have you to actually finish things and push them through, but they remain open? So there's a lot of first steps, kind of digging that leaders really need to engage in. And then it becomes, how are your meeting practices? Do you have, information that's located in places where everybody has access to it? Are people really clear about their roles and responsibilities? Do teams understand how we're supposed to communicate with each other? So it gets back to a lot of very basic sort of teaming practices, very basic procedural things that I think when they're done with more intentionality can then start to help us understand how we can bring workload back into more of a sustainable realm.
And is there a quantity, a number of hours or projects or something by which we can start to see, this is where workload begins dipping into the unsustainable level?
That's the hard part because it's so subjective. And I talk about this a lot associated with my burnout work too, is that when we're talking about an unsustainable workload, what's unsustainable for me may be very different for you. What was unsustainable for me when I was 25 looks very different than what it is right now when I have an 8.5-year-old and a whole host of other, just life obligations that I have to attend to at this age. And so I think it's a fluid, subjective thing to be thinking about. And that's why it can be so hard, I think, for leaders to really wrestle with what does this mean? Because for one team in one department, it may look one way. And for a different team, it may look completely different. And so you have to take it on kind of a team by team, case by case basis. So there isn't like a hard and fast like metric. Like I can't say it's 7 projects for you and 3 projects for you. It's totally like team and industry dependent.
Yeah, I've been thinking about things in a similar light in terms of if what you're doing is fascinating, riveting, engaging stuff that lights you up at your core and resembles play, it's almost like there's no limit in terms of like, as long as you can like eat and exercise and sleep and see your loved ones, you might be able to bang out a massive number of hours. And yet, if it feels like drudgery, then maybe even 20 hours a week is too much. It has been sort of my subjective experience. And as I look at stories of like, I don't know, I think about like hackers, it's like these folks are just cranking away at their computer for hours upon hours upon hours. And yet it's fun, fascinating, interesting, and juicy for them because it's so cool. I'm learning, I'm exploring, I'm discovering, oh my gosh, this thing worked. Wow, I did not expect that to work. Oh, I made a discovery. I should probably share this with the world so that the world becomes safer. And I'm contributing to that and making a little bit of a name for myself. And yet at the end of the day, they're still seated, tapping on keys, looking at a screen, whereas another person can be doing the same distributed across dozens of consistently interrupted projects that they don't really care that much about how they work out to be and feel tremendously stressed, burnt out, flustered by the matter.
Yes. So that's an interesting example, but I think it goes back to the power of knowing and understanding the impact that you're having and the impact that you're making. And do you feel that C in the ABCs, right? Do you feel a sense of challenge and growth? Do you feel like you're able to learn new things? Do you have people who are around you who can show you the ropes and help you get from point A to point B or wherever it is that you want to take in terms of the next step in your career? And it's interesting what you were just talking about. And I don't know that you've talked or thought about it through game theory, but one of the small kind of strategies that I talk about in that particular part of the book is, sort of adding gamification thinking to some of your work for leaders to kind of introduce gaming concepts and practices. So when you think about playing a game or like for me, I just inherently go to video games. Part of the reason why they're so consuming and they're so enticing and you want to stay with them and it's hard to break away from them is because the objective is really clear, right? I have to get to level 20 or I have to rescue this particular person. So there's a clear endpoint and there's clear goals along the way. And while you're going and trying to achieve that particular goal or whatever getting to the next level looks like, there's all sorts of phenomenal feedback cues, right? There's bells and whistles and the point total gets higher and you're getting such immediate feedback that you're on the right track or that you're doing the right thing or that you're not doing the right thing. So you can course correct. So it's those same types of concepts that can help leaders think about how do I build some of that into helping people still stay engaged and have fun with the work that they're doing? Because a lot of us aren't.
And so then what are some of the coolest ways you've seen folks implement some of these principles, these gamifications into normal professional work life that have been fun and effective?
One of the companies that I talk about, it's actually a really big law firm that I talk about in the book, right? And I don't think we oftentimes think of law firms as being, I certainly don't, as having been in that world for a long time, as being ultra forward thinking when it comes to these types of concepts. But a big law firm that I talk about in the book really has created sort of this, almost like this separate sort of leadership education for their lawyers. And they actually give them titles. So normally you're just an associate and then you're a partner, but they actually give them new titles as they ascend through different pieces of this leadership academy. And so in addition to the titles, they get one-on-one coaching. So they're getting, I think, some of that more strategic feedback about how they're doing and how they can continue to get better at each level. And there's also, I believe, a notification or something that goes out to the clients as well. This is an indicator to their clients that, hey, the lawyer who you're working with is now ascended almost right into the next level of the game of sorts. And, here is the wealth of talent that they continue to bring. So again, I don't know that they or I were looking at that through the gamification lens, but you can see how when you start to build sort of larger scale intentional programs like that, you can have those types of game theory sort of built in or, used as a way to explain some of the beneficial outcomes.
Okay. And I would love to get your viewpoints in terms of, let's say we're in an organization where, unfortunately, not a lot of these cool best practices are at work, but we have our little sphere of influence in terms of a team or even just a couple direct reports or even ourselves. Any pro tips on how we can take advantage of some of these principles to make some good things happen?
I think that the best place to start, and certainly where I advocated in my first book too, is with your team, with a team. And even if your team is just you and two other people, that's a team, right? I think sometimes we think that teams have to be these really large entities, and that's certainly not the case. And so I think starting with some of the best practices to implement some of that sticky recognition and mattering, just because the outcomes are so strong with that. So that's just simply one of the researchers I interviewed for that chapter said, sticky recognition and mattering lives at the day-to-day moments in your interactions. So those 10-minute moments when you're walking down the hallway with someone or you've just patched into the Zoom and it's a few of you just kind of hanging out. What do you say? Do you interact with somebody? How's your day? How's your family? What's going on? What has your attention right now? Just sort of, I think, getting back to relearning how to see people when we're so consumed by our work and technology, I think is a really important starting point. And then one of the things that kept coming up as a thread in a lot of the successful companies and people that I interviewed was this notion of just I call them Seinfeld meetings because Seinfeld was a show about nothing. And so it's these one-on-one moments to talk to people really about nothing, purposely without a business outcome associated with it. So again, just spending 15 minutes, every other week, just checking in on someone and asking them, what has your attention right now can be hugely beneficial. Just talking to each other about just best teaming practices. Are we all aligned together on how we're communicating with each other? About how we see our team, about what the end result is. Are we all clear? Do we all have clear guardrails about, where we're supposed to start and where we're supposed to end up? So again, I think some of these human practices in combination with some basic teaming practices, I think is always a winning combination.
All righty. And could you share with us a cool story of a team or organization that really just put these principles into practice in a beautiful, illustrative, transformational way?
One example that I mention is it's really a framework. So it's less, I think, about a company, although there's a few companies that are implementing this. In the work sustainability chapter, talking about it's called the US Bank Guidelines, where US banks in-house, teams of sorts have really intentionally thought about how do we want to create relationships with our outside vendors, our outside counsel, the outside people who we work with, and our internal folks that's going to be supportive of intentional delegation, that's going to try and minimize the fire drills and the urgency, that's going to honor and respect communication practices and work-life integration boundaries and things of that nature. And so talking about the different sort of principles that they have that become these guidelines that do just what I said, talking to them about how they've started to implement those both internally and externally with the people who they work have certainly been eye-opening. So I think a lot of where we're at right now with some of this is we've got to just try it.
Okay. Well, tell me anything else you want to make sure to mention before we hear about some of your favorite things.
So I think for me, one of the big takeaways from the book is that this comes down to this being leading well, comes down to what I call tiny noticeable things or TNTs that are a combination of a little bit more human stuff and a little bit more teams stuff that together I think become a really powerful source of motivational fuel for folks.
Big thanks to Paula for sharing her wisdom with us. And big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. One sponsor to check out is Acorns. If you've got a New Year's resolution to save more money this 2025, don't be among the 92% who fail. Become awesome at saving your money with Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing so your money has a chance to grow for you, your kids, and your retirement. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you invest with the spare money you've got right now. You can start with $5 or even just your spare change. And it doesn't take much time at all. I find the Acorns site and app to be beautiful, easy, convenient. NerdWallet rates them excellently, and so do I. So head over to acorns.com/awesome or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. And a little disclosure here, paid on client endorsement, compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/awesome. One sponsor to check out is EarthBreeze. I recently saw a spooky documentary about the avalanche of plastic we throw away or try to recycle, but doesn't really get recycled. So I've been trying to cut back. And the most delightful way I've been cutting back has been foregoing those huge laundry detergent bottles for EarthBreeze detergent sheets. EarthBreeze detergent comes in convenient plastic-free packaging, so they're more eco-friendly than traditional detergent. And I just love how quick and easy and portable they are. I can keep some loaded in my suitcase for an Airbnb or travel laundry emergency. I'm ready. And I save a good 20 seconds of carefully trying to pour and measure liquid detergent into the machine by tossing a quick and easy sheet in there. I love their scent-free version, which is easy on my clothes and skin. So check out EarthBreeze for an easy way to get clean clothes without all the plastic waste. And get 40% off with your subscription at earthbreeze.com/awesome. That's earthbreeze.com/awesome. Well, now could you share favorite quotes, something you find inspiring?
One of my favorite quotes is between what is said but not meant and what is meant but not said, a lot of love is lost.
And a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
One of the research papers that I found really fascinating talked about how, this is just a kind of an interesting way that they were able to measure a team's heart rate synchrony. And when teams' heart rates were in sync, I think it was like more than 75% of the time made good decisions together. And so it was really indicative of psychological safety and trust. So I thought it was just really interesting to kind of look at some of these things from a physiological way and see how when heart rates were more in sync, there was more trust and better decision-making among teams.
Yeah. And a favorite book?
I love Bridget Schulte's her latest book is called Overwork. So I'm obviously digging into all of the things, work related about how we can do work better and make work better. I keep coming back to over and over again Kelly McGonigal's book, The Upside of Stress, because I have spent so much time in the burnout space. I think really taking an interesting look at what is stress meant to help us do. It's meant to help us connect. It's meant to help us find meaning, and that a meaningful life is a stressful life on some level. And so that reminder is helpful.
Okay. And is there a key nugget you share that really seems to connect and resonate with folks they quote back to you often?
Yes, there's a skill that I talk about with that sticky recognition and mattering piece called a thank you plus, where so if you don't say thank you very frequently, but this could be at work or outside of work, start there. But the plus piece is to add the behavior or the strength that you saw that led to the good outcome. So it can be as simple as saying, thank you so much for summarizing the reports. The way that you did that helped me find the key takeaways quickly, and it made my life a lot easier and the conversation with my client simpler. Just that extra little smidge of peace really resonates with people. And so I oftentimes will have people trying to practice the thank you plus to me, or emailing me and calling out the fact that they were trying to do a thank you plus, or mentioning that to me in some way.
Okay. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
They can go to my website, which is stressandresilience.com, or they can find me at Paula Davis on LinkedIn.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
I would say, don't forget about the fundamental human need that we all have to just make sure that we're making an impact in our world, and just being really keen to share that with people when you notice it.
All right. Paula, thank you.
Thanks so much, Pete.
I really appreciate Paula's super simple ABC model there, because I think it does a lot of work, and it is simple. And it's nice to remember that we need not overcomplicate sometimes why a job isn't jiving for us, working for us, feeling good. Do we have the autonomy? Do we have the belonging? Do we have the challenge? And with that, you can say, oh, that's what's been missing. Okay. Let's zoom in and see what we can do about that. Great stuff from Paula. If you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced, please visit us at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP1027. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.